Hey guys, welcome back to the Readers. I hope you are having an amazing day. Let's get right into the stories. The first one is an entitled people story. What would you do if your HOA president emailed you, in writing, that your private well was now a shared neighborhood amenity? Because that's exactly what happened to me. And when my power bill spiked, I set up one thing that exposed everyone. Want to guess what it was? So this happened about 6 months ago, and I'm still getting a kick out of how it all played out. I figured you guys might enjoy this one. First, let me give you some background. My wife and I own this property that's a bit different from the rest of the neighborhood. We bought it about 8 years ago. It's an older house from the 1970s, sitting on about an acre and a half. Nice sized lot with mature oak trees and plenty of space. The thing is, back in the late 2000s, developers came in and built this whole subdivision around us. Cookie cutter houses, perfectly manicured lawns, the whole 9 yards. They set up an HOA and everything. Now, our property got grandfathered in, so we're not subject to most of their rules, but we do have to follow some basic stuff like keeping the grass cut and not painting our house hot pink or whatever. Most of the time, we get along fine with the neighbors. They're decent people for the most part. The key thing you need to understand about our property is that we're not on city water. We have our own private well, a deep artesian well that produces some of the best tasting water you've ever had. I'm not exaggerating here. This water is naturally filtered through rock layers and comes up crystal clear. We've spent good money on this system too. I'm talking about a modern submersible pump, state-of-the-art filtration with UV sterilization, and a big pressure tank in the basement. This isn't some rusty pipe sticking out of the ground. It's a serious piece of infrastructure that cost me close to $15,000 to upgrade when we first moved in. A few years back, I ran a water line out to the back corner of the property. The idea was to make it easier to water a future vegetable garden and wash equipment without having to drag 300 feet of hose from the house. I installed this spigot on a nice sturdy post about 20 feet inside our property line. The spot I picked was convenient because there's this walking path that runs behind several houses. It's maintained by the HOA as common area, but my spigot is definitely on my land, well inside the boundary. The HOA is run by this board of residents who seem to take their jobs way too seriously. The president is this woman who moved into the neighborhood maybe 3 years ago. Let's call her the president since I don't want to use names. She's one of these people who loves being in charge and has strong opinions about everything. From day one, she seemed to have it out for our property. I think the fact that we have this big lot with an older house just bugs her. It doesn't fit her vision of suburban perfection or something. Anyway, that's the setup. Now here's where things get interesting. About 6 months ago, I started noticing our electric bill was higher than usual. Not crazy high, but definitely more than normal. I figured maybe the air conditioning was working harder or something, but when the next month's bill came and it was high again, I started paying attention. I went out and checked our meter readings and tried to figure out what was using extra power. Everything in the house seemed normal. The AC wasn't running more than usual, we hadn't bought any new appliances. But then I noticed something weird. The well pump was cycling on and off way more than it should be. I could hear it kicking on at random times, sometimes even in the middle of the night when everyone was asleep and nobody was using water. My first thought was that we had a leak somewhere in the underground line. That would explain the extra pump activity and the higher electric bills. So I spent a whole weekend walking around the property looking for soft spots in the ground or areas where the grass was growing better than it should be. Nothing. No sign of a leak anywhere. I was sitting on the back porch the following Saturday afternoon, still trying to figure this out when I heard the pump kick on again. I knew for certain nobody inside was using water. My wife was taking a nap, and I was just sitting there with a beer. So I decided to walk back toward that spigot and see if maybe there was a problem with the connection there. As I got closer to the back of the property, I started hearing voices. Kids laughing and shouting. I rounded this big oak tree and couldn't believe what I was seeing. There was my neighbor from down the street, this guy who drives a huge pickup truck, standing next to this massive inflatable water slide. Had to be 20 feet long. And he was filling it up using my spigot with a brand new garden hose. But that wasn't all. Another neighbor was there too, washing his oversized truck with a pressure washer that was also hooked up to my water through some kind of splitter attachment. When they saw me walking up, they both waved like nothing was wrong. The guy with the water slide actually called out to me. He said thanks for letting everyone use the HOA spigot, especially on these hot days. He seemed genuinely grateful. That's when it hit me. They thought this was some kind of community water source. I stayed calm and walked over to them. I told them I thought there might be some misunderstanding because this was actually my private well, not connected to the city or the HOA at all. The guy with the water slide looked confused and a bit defensive. He told me that the HOA president had announced at the last monthly meeting that residents on this end of the street could use this water source for gardening and washing cars. He said she had specifically mentioned it as one of the neighborhood amenities. I realized this wasn't just a couple of neighbors making an honest mistake. The HOA president had apparently told people they could use my water. I politely explained about the electric bills and how this was actually my private system. Both guys reluctantly disconnected their hoses, but I could tell they weren't happy about it. As they were packing up, I heard one of them say he was going to talk to the president about this. That evening, I sent an email to the HOA board. I kept it professional but firm. The subject line was unauthorized use of private well water. I explained what had happened, clarified that the well and all the water lines were my private property, and requested that the board send out a notice to residents telling them to stop using it immediately. The response I got back was unbelievable. The president replied the next day with this incredibly condescending email. She wrote that she understood my confusion as someone who owned a legacy property, but the board had designated that water access point for shared community use to enhance neighborhood amenities. She said my attempt to restrict access from fellow neighbors wasn't in the spirit of community cooperation. Then she had the nerve to tell me to consider the matter closed. I read that email 3 times. She had actually put in writing that the HOA was claiming rights to my private property. I was furious, but I also realized she had just handed me exactly what I needed. Instead of firing back another email, I decided to handle this systematically. If she wanted to play hardball, I was going to document everything properly. First, I went to one of those outdoor supply stores and bought a trail camera. Nothing fancy, just something that would record video with timestamps. I set it up with a good view of the spigot hidden behind some brush where nobody would notice it. Next, I went to a plumbing supply place and bought a commercial-grade water flow meter. This thing was designed for measuring exactly how many gallons were going through a pipe. I installed it right before the spigot so I could track every drop of water being used. Then I started keeping a daily log. Every morning, I'd check the meter reading and review the trail camera footage. Date, gallons used, and notes about who was doing what. The results were eye-opening. The first week alone, I documented over 2,000 gallons of usage. The guy with the water slide filled it up twice more. A woman from 3 houses down came by with 5-gallon buckets and made multiple trips. Turns out she was filling some kind of decorative fountain in her front yard. Another neighbor spent an hour pressure washing his entire driveway and sidewalk. But it got worse. Word had apparently spread through the neighborhood that there was free water available. I started seeing people I didn't even recognize. Someone was bringing their car there for washing because it was more convenient than their own driveway. A few people were filling up containers to water their flower beds rather than use their own hose connections. One morning I checked the camera and saw footage from 2 in the morning of some teenager filling up a bunch of water balloons. Even at night, people were helping themselves to my water. While all this was going on, I was also gathering my legal documentation. I pulled out the original deed to the property, which clearly showed the property lines. I got a copy of the official county survey map that had been done when we bought the house. Most importantly, I found the state registration paperwork for the artesian well, which listed me as the sole owner and operator. After about a month of collecting evidence, I had everything I needed. The water meter showed they had used almost 15,000 gallons. 15,000. The trail camera had captured dozens of different people using my water for everything from washing cars to filling kiddie pools. I drafted a formal letter to the HOA board. I sent it certified mail with return receipt requested, addressed to the president personally, but copied to all board members. The language was very professional and formal. The letter started by referencing her email where she had claimed the water spigot was for shared community use. Then I requested that within 15 business days, she provide me with specific documentation. I wanted to see the legal easement or right-of-way document that gave the HOA access to my private water infrastructure. I asked for the public utility filing that designated my private well as a community water source. And I requested the official HOA board meeting minutes where this designation was voted on and recorded according to their own bylaws. At the end, I wrote that failure to provide this documentation would be taken as an admission that no such rights existed. The response came back even faster than I expected. The president sent another letter on official HOA letterhead, but clearly not written by any lawyer. She basically doubled down, saying the board reaffirmed its position that the utility was for community use. Then she actually threatened me, saying my continued obstruction might result in fines being assessed against my property. Perfect. She had now put the HOA's official position in a formal mailed letter. This was exactly what I needed. I sent one more email to the board requesting an emergency meeting to present new information regarding the water dispute. I also mentioned that my legal counsel would be joining me to help clarify the property rights involved. That last part wasn't strictly true yet, but I figured it would get their attention and make sure the whole board showed up. The meeting was scheduled for the following Thursday evening at the community clubhouse. When I walked in, all 5 board members were there looking stern and official. The president started things off by saying they were there to discuss my refusal to cooperate with community standards. I thanked them for meeting with me, then told them I wasn't there to discuss cooperation, I was there to present facts. I had prepared everything carefully. First, I spread out the large county survey map on the table in front of them. I pointed to where the spigot was located and showed them it was clearly 20 feet inside my property line, not in any common area. Then I placed the well registration documents on the table. I explained that this was a private well registered to me with the state, and that the HOA had no ownership rights or legal claim to it whatsoever. Next, I pulled out copies of both her emails and her final letter. I read back her exact words about the board's position that this was a community use designation, and reminded them about my certified letter requesting proof of that claim, which they had failed to provide. But here's where I really got them. I brought out my logbook and opened up a tablet computer I had borrowed from my nephew. I told them that in the 34 days since I had first contacted them about this issue, the community had used 14,850 gallons of my private water. I showed them the data from the calibrated water meter I had installed. Then I played a video I had put together from the trail camera footage, about 2 minutes of time-stamped clips showing the parade of neighbors filling pools, pressure washing driveways, watering entire lawns, washing multiple cars. You could watch their faces change as the video played. They went from looking confident and annoyed to just pale. But I wasn't done. I slid one final document across the table. It was an invoice addressed to the HOA. I had calculated the cost of the water using the city's rate schedule for comparison. I added the electricity costs based on the pump's wattage and total runtime. I even included a reasonable charge for wear and tear on my equipment from all the extra usage. The total came to $1,247.58. I told them I expected payment within 30 days before I would need to explore further legal action for trespass and property damage. You could have heard a pin drop in that room. The board members all looked at the president, who was opening and closing her mouth like a fish. Their bluff had been called and they knew it. The HOA treasurer was the first one to speak. She said they would need to consult with their legal counsel immediately. The meeting was adjourned right then and there with no discussion or debate. 2 days later, I got a phone call from someone who identified himself as the HOA's attorney. He was extremely apologetic and professional. He confirmed that a check for the full amount was already being cut and would be mailed to me that day. He also said that a correction and retraction would be sent to all residents in the neighborhood. Sure enough, the next week every household got an email blast with the subject line, "Urgent correction regarding water spigot." The message explicitly stated that the water source was private property and that any resident found on my property or using the water would be subject to fines from the HOA and potential trespassing charges from me. Just to make sure there wouldn't be any confusion going forward, I went out to the spigot and removed the handle entirely. Then I installed a heavy-duty lockable metal cover over the whole pipe outlet. Problem solved permanently. The aftermath was pretty amusing. The neighbors who had been using my water suddenly couldn't make eye contact when they saw me outside. The guy with the giant water slide deflated it, and I never saw it again. There was this awkward silence whenever I was doing yard work and any of them were around. At the next annual HOA meeting, which happened about 2 months later, there was a motion of no confidence brought against the president. The vote wasn't even close. She was voted out, with several people citing her reckless handling of the water issue that had cost the HOA money and exposed them to potential lawsuits. Now, 6 months later, everything is back to normal. Actually, better than normal. My electric bills are back down to where they should be. I have peace and quiet in my backyard again. And every time I pour myself a glass of that cold, clear water from my own tap, I can't help but smile. The new HOA president introduced herself a few weeks after taking over. She seemed reasonable and apologized for the whole mess. She said the board had learned some important lessons about property rights and doing proper research before making claims. I told her I appreciated that, and mentioned that I hoped they had also learned something about the difference between community cooperation and community theft. The thing that still gets me is how entitled some people can be. They literally thought they had a right to my property because they lived in a subdivision with an HOA. Like somehow being part of a homeowners association gave them claim to whatever they decided was convenient for them to use. But here's what I learned from all this. When people try to bulldoze you with authority they don't actually have, the best response isn't to get angry or argue. It's to document everything, know your rights, and present facts they can't dispute. The president thought she could intimidate me into backing down by putting official letterhead on her demands and threatening fines. Instead, she gave me exactly the evidence I needed to prove they were in the wrong. Her arrogance and refusal to back down when she was clearly overstepping just made the final outcome that much more satisfying. These days, I've got my water to myself again. The system runs efficiently, my bills are reasonable, and I don't have to worry about strangers wandering around my property at all hours, helping themselves to whatever they want. Every morning when I make coffee with that pure, cold well water, I'm reminded that sometimes standing up for what's right and doing your homework really does pay off. They learned that a community is built on mutual respect, not shared theft. And honestly, knowing that I taught an entire HOA board and a bunch of entitled neighbors that lesson, that's worth more than the $1,247.58 they had to pay me back. The best part is, word has gotten around the neighborhood about what happened. I've had several people come up to me and say they thought what the old board tried to do was completely wrong. A few have even asked for advice on dealing with HOA overreach in their own situations. I tell them the same thing every time. Know your property lines, keep good records, and never let anyone convince you that community spirit means giving up your rights. Because at the end of the day, your property is your property, and no amount of official-looking paperwork or threatening letters changes that basic fact. The water still tastes as good as ever, maybe even a little sweeter knowing that every drop belongs to me and nobody else has any claim to it. That's the taste of victory, and let me tell you, it goes down smooth. The next one is a malicious compliance story. I work at a public library, and most days are calm even when it's busy. Last month, someone higher up sent out a shiny new accountability memo that said every single checkout must include a printed receipt, no exceptions, no asking the patron, no email option unless they request it after you print. The memo literally said it reduces disputes, and if a patron refuses the paper, you still print it and discard it yourself for audit consistency. We all kinda rolled our eyes, but I decided fine. I will follow it exactly because I am not getting blamed later. The next Saturday, we had a line out the door, strollers, seniors, kids, everyone, and I printed a receipt for every checkout, even when people said no thanks. I didn't speed print either because the policy also said to highlight due dates and verbally confirm them, so I did that too every time. One guy checked out 47 items for a book club donation sort, so I printed 2 full pages of receipt, highlighted, confirmed, stapled, and then put the duplicate copy in the audit tray like the instructions told us. Another patron asked why I was throwing paper straight into recycling, and I just said, "New rules, sorry," because I wasn't gonna editorialize. By noon, we had burned through 2 rolls of thermal paper and the printer started doing that faint stripe thing, which means it's about to jam and need a reboot. So I logged a supply request and kept printing anyway, because the memo didn't say to pause for common sense. The line got slower, people got cranky, and we ran out of paper completely, which meant we couldn't check anything out at all because the receipt screen blocks the checkout until it prints. The fallout was immediate. The children's librarian had to cancel a storytime giveaway, the hold shelf was overflowing, and the director got a call from the city office because someone complained they drove 30 minutes and couldn't borrow books because the printer was empty. Monday morning we got a follow-up email that receipts are now optional again and please be mindful of waste. I kept the original memo in my drawer just in case they forget how we got here. The next one is an entitled people story. This is about my aunt. She has always been a bit snobby, and that has sort of shaped how I and my side of the family interact with her and her side. Aunt has 3 kids and been married 3 times. All of the men had been past friends of my dad's, I think most from college. The 2 oldest kids are my older cousins. Both girls are from first husband. The 3rd kid, my little cousin male, is from 3rd husband. Aunt and uncle have always done things for the benefit of just their family. And I mean just the nuclear family. While my 2 older cousins would split their time between their parents, aunt and uncle really focused on themselves and their son. I can give examples in the comments, but to keep this shorter, I had to cut some stuff. Aunt and uncle treated my older cousins a lot differently than my younger cousin, and it seemed to affect them to the point that my older 2 cousins don't really have anything to do with aunt and uncle anymore, unless they absolutely need to. In the last few years, multiple things have changed for the family as a whole. My dad passed when he was relatively young. My mom, who had breast cancer when we were all younger, had her cancer come back during COVID and came back affecting her bones now. Grandpa also passed in the last year. All of this has given me the perception that life is something to be cherished and is not a for sure thing. I am saying this because things have been happening and some things were mentioned about wills. After Grandpa passed, we have had talks about different things and how people want things when they go, bringing me aunt and uncle back into the fold now. Apparently at some point after Grandpa passed, aunt talked to Grandma and brought up how she, aunt, was the only one left, so she would get everything after Grandma died. First off, I don't want to think about losing Grandma yet. I want her for however much longer we have her. But I do understand these talks sometimes need to happen. But I don't think I would ever say anything like this if I was in my aunt's role. Grandma told my mom that aunt had said this, and apparently Grandma's response back to aunt was, "Your brother had a family too, we won't just disinherit them just because he has passed." Now add this on top of other claims that aunt and uncle have said the farm should be theirs, and how they'll turn the nice horse barn that Grandpa had built for Grandma into a cattle barn and essentially kick my mother and sister out from usage of it, as well as younger cousin, who honestly doesn't fall very far from either of his parents' trees that Grandpa promised him a certain amount of land. Now mind you, this amount of land is a large portion of what my grandparents own in its entirety. If Grandpa had promised younger cousin this amount of land, Grandpa would have tried to keep stuff equal for the rest of us. And there's 5 of us grandchildren in total. What younger cousin is claiming would not have been feasibly possible to divide up the land that they own and give all of us equal amounts if the amount little cousin is saying is the amount stated. I am really just ranting about my family. I know that there is nothing that I can do in this situation because there is no need for it. Grandma and Grandpa, before he passed, took care of it. Just needed to get this off my chest about what is happening. The next one is an entitled parent story. I apologize now as this is long. Issues with my grandma have been building up for years and now they are finally coming to a head as I am being told I am not allowed to have a baby shower with my side of the family unless I invite her. I am 27, boyfriend 28, male, and we are current 27 weeks and 4 days pregnant. My family had no contact with my grandparents for about 8 years due to a falling out with my mother in which I witnessed. The fight happened when I was in middle school, so my grandparents were not there as I matured and grew into the person I am today. My grandpa ended up getting cancer, and this was the reason we brushed everything off to support him. Before my grandpa had passed, he asked my mom to promise that my GMA wouldn't be alone. I never made this promise. When I found out I was pregnant, it was because I got sick and kinda snapped on BF. We had been trying for a while, and my mom asked if that could be the reason. A few days later, I bought a test, and my mother called while I was at the store. It was positive, and I didn't want to tell her over the phone, so I said it was negative. BF got home from work, and we had a very special moment as I had made a box with little baby trinkets and the positive test to surprise him. I had guilt for lying to my mom, so we decided to go tell her. This was my first mistake. As soon as we told my mom, she was excited and insisted we tell my sister. We had to have been only 6 weeks along at the time, and I told her that we weren't going to tell anyone else because it was too soon. She insisted and began guilt-tripping me as she is my sister. We ended up caving and going to her house the same night. My mother put the box at my sister's door, rang the doorbell, and ran back to the car to hide. My sister was excited, but then my mother began insisting we tell my sister-in-law because it was only fair, as my sister knew. And how would she feel not knowing, and my sister did. I was called daily for a week, being guilt-tripped into telling my sister-in-law. I told my mother after we tell sister-in-law we would not be telling anyone else, which she agreed to. We told my sister-in-law with the same box, and she began jumping up and down with excitement. Right after my mother started saying I needed to tell my G-ma. Remind you, this is the woman who I hadn't had a relationship with. I was cordial with her. I'd say hello, attempt to avoid her, and give her a hug goodbye. She is a bitter old woman who thinks she can say or do whatever she wants and that everyone has to accept it because that's just who she is. And everyone else has just accepted this. I'm going to list a few key moments below of things she has done towards me. She has always made offhanded remarks and snide comments. Feel free to skip past these as it will be long. Just attempting to give more context as my family act clueless on why I want nothing to do with her. When I was in middle school, my best friend's apartment burnt down right before her birthday and Christmas. I was working with my grandma doing team penning as the flag girl. I yelled at older man when they got the wrong number calf to the other side of a gate. I had spent the whole day collecting donations and got a good amount of money. Well, my GMA said she was going to take it all to R.C. Willie's to put it on a gift card. Anytime I would bring it up, she would brush it off, and when I'd talk to my mom, she would tell me to forget about it. I never saw the money again. A few years ago, my cousin was coming to our state to play a gig. I was already planning to go to support/surprise him, and my grandma decided to go but couldn't find anyone to go with her. She ended up calling me, and I picked her up and brought her along. In the car, she learned that I conceal carry and began having a tantrum like a child and demanding that I leave my piece in the car or I better take her home. Where we were going was a sketchy part of town, so there was no way I was leaving it in the car. She threw a fit for the rest of the night, and I could not wait to get her home. She had mentioned needing help with her yard as all of the leaves had dropped and no one would help her. I made the drive to her house, and the whole thing turned into me doing all the work and her micromanaging me on how to do it. This would have been different if I was being paid. I ended up leaving before the job was done. After my grandpa had passed, she claimed to not have the money for his headstone. My grandpa had a motorcycle that was paid off collecting dust, so I agreed to buy the bike and the money would go towards his headstone. She ended up getting an expensive dog that wasn't actually what was advertised, saying my grandpa knew it was her favorite and he would have wanted her to have it. She already has a dog she pays no attention to. She is a poor animal owner, does not exercise her dogs, and they defecate in her home. Yet she claimed I was a horrible dog owner because I lived in an apartment. I was always going on hikes or to the dog park after work and on the weekends. I drove separate to meet my family somewhere, and once we were leaving to go back to my parents, she jumped in my car to ride with me so she could sit in the front. She belittled my driving, music taste, and other life choices like my tattoos all the way back to my parents' home. Anytime she has tried to ride in my car since, I had stated I wasn't going back to my parents and would end up going home. For my birthday, I received some gift cards. My Texas Roadhouse gift card vanished off the table as I hadn't put them in my purse yet. I had asked out loud if anyone had seen it and glanced at her. Once she was about to leave, she came up to me with it saying it somehow ended up in her purse. She began making trinkets with family photos that included my ex-fiancé, we had photos excluding him, and would tell me I needed to cut him out of all of them as she wasn't able to. She is the type that tries to kiss on the lips. I have always found this weird, to each their own. I have made it very clear over the years this is not something that I do, and she has continuously tried to overstep this. This will come up later. I refuse to go out to eat with her as she is the type to complain about everything or blame her mistakes on the waiter. Examples, her sweet potato being too sweet, too much cheese on her grilled cheese, eating the meat out of a crab leg, and belittling the server that there was no meat. Well, my mother had been pressuring since I had told my sister-in-law to tell my GMA, calling multiple times a week saying how would she feel, and it's not fair, everyone else knows and she doesn't. It was so bad we got into a fight on Father's Day, and I began bleeding the next day. Luckily, everything was fine with baby girl. My mom called a few weeks later asking why I wasn't sending her ultrasounds, and she hadn't heard from me in a minute, and I explained because every conversation turned into needing to tell my GMA. She began going off about how she just wants to tell the world, and that she isn't allowed to be excited. This turned into a whole argument. It wasn't fair that my best friend was the first to know. She helped confirm the test. It wasn't fair my co-workers knew. I had been extremely sick, so they found out pretty early. I was given conditions. I wasn't allowed to tell anyone else until I told my GMA. I had to tell my GMA and my grandpa on my father's side the same day. I was not allowed to do it a week apart or even a day apart. It had to be the same day. Being given conditions and the amount of pressure to tell people made me not want to tell anyone. We finally got to a point where we were comfortable telling people. I had bought fake lottery tickets and got my dad to bring Grandpa to his house, one of my uncles with him, and it took them a minute to understand, but they were both excited. The last time I had seen my grandmother was at my niece's birthday party. I had already been putting distinct between us. While BF and I were leaving, she loudly in front of everyone said, "OP, do I not get a hug?" She was tucked into a back nook at the table, so I loudly stated I would not be climbing over the table. Back to telling them about my pregnancy. My mom snapped at her on the phone as they had planned to have dinner, and GMA decided she was going to go meet up with my aunt who canceled, which would have made her late for dinner. Once she arrived, the family talked for a minute, then I gave her one of the fake lottery tickets. She began hollering with excitement, then dug her long fake nails into my head and yanked my head around, trying to give me a kiss on the lips. I put my hand in her face and said, "Absolutely not. You know I do not do that." She began going off on why I don't kiss her. She doesn't care where my lips have been. She kisses everyone. I made it very known in front of everyone that I do not kiss anyone besides BF on the lips, as I think it is gross. My mother says I was being dramatic and that she was just joking. My sister says that she was just excited. I see it as her trying to step over my boundaries again. BF and I went to my second cousin's wedding. None of my immediate family was going, as it was a 1.5-hour drive. We went and caught up with family and it was a beautiful day. Well, GMA showed up asking people where I was as she needed to talk to me. No one knew she was coming and my cousin came and found me and told me. Well, I avoided her as this was not the time or place. As BF and I were leave, she once again loudly say, "OP." I went over to her and she says, "I don't know what I have done to you." Mind you, we are at a wedding surrounded by family. I gave her a half hug as she was sitting down and told her she crossed my boundary by trying to force a kiss on me and that for the last 10 plus years she has been extremely mean and that I am the type to not just drop it anymore. Her response was, "Well, I just love you." I said that's fine, but it's not an excuse. I walked away and gave hugs to the rest of the family. I learned later that right after she hugged one of my cousins, she was about to cry and left before we even did. Now, to the current issue, my family is saying that I cannot have a baby shower unless she is invited. That I have to suck it up for my mom, as it is her mother, she is family. That by me not wanting to invite her, is me trying to force them to cut her off, or to pick sides. I don't believe that I should have to try to avoid someone on a day that is about BF, me and our unborn child. If my mom or sister-in-law throw it for me, she has to be invited. I suggested doing it myself and having it at my home once again. I was told I would have to invite her. I am being told that I am just being mean. It is not fair to my mother as she is the one that will be punished. That I am forcing my mother into picking between her mom or her daughter. They can't believe that I would rather not have a baby shower than invited her. What do? Allow the women who has been so mean to me to show up? Not have one as I would rather avoid any conflict or awkward situations altogether. I mentioned to my sister what happens when we are opening gifts. She says to put on a fake smile, hug her, and say thank you. Anyway, thank you for watching.